In January 2024, I set myself a challenge to listen to as many different presses of Dark Side of the Moon as I could. Dark Side, a record that has been a phenomenon from the day it was released and continues to be relevant nearly 52 years later. I wonder if it's the biggest selling record on vinyl of all time. How many of us have dropped the needle on the record, heard that crackle, the ticking clock, the discombobulated words, the heartbeat, and that crescendo, and then settled in to be challenged and delighted every single time. This video will focus on my top 5 vinyl presses of Dark Side of the Moon, with a caveat or two. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, well here we are, the culmination of my year-long pleasurable experience of listening to as many vinyl pressings of Dark Side of the Moon as I could. Now, I have a couple of notable mentions before I rank my top 5. Many of you, I know, will have the Australian quadrophonic press in your collection. It's actually really good. I really enjoy it. I owned it for years. It's pressed really nicely, good quality vinyl, particularly compared to some 70s Australian vinyl, significantly better than subsequent presses. But interestingly, Scott, and you know who you are, you sold me a stereo copy, the Australian first press stereo, which I got about 4 or 5 weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer. And it's really enjoyable too. I think that it is the equal of the Australian quad. Quadrophonic mixes are unusual. You definitely hear some nuances and some pretty significant differences in the mix, particularly on songs like Money, between quadrophonic and stereo. So take your pick. If you get the chance to buy, and you can get them really cheaply, a really good Australian stereo press. And I know my friend Fergal, for example, has a lovely copy. It is excellent. You can rest easy. Now, the more recent represses, the 50th and the 40th, are various kind of digital remasters of the work that was done in 2003 for the 30th anniversary release, more of which to come in a few minutes. One other notable mention is the Canadian first press, which I listened to about halfway through this process, and it's very, very enjoyable as well. What it does lack, though, is some of the detail that appears very clearly in this top 5. And this top 5 is very different. I do have one proviso, though, and that is that the number one, the best listening experience that I had this year listening to Dark Side of the Moon was provided by club member Toby. He has solid blue triangle Harvest UK first press, which is the holy grail of this record. The what's called the A2B2 press, and if you don't know what that means, it means in the dead wax on the inside of your record are inscribed the matrix numbers, and if your UK press ends A2 inside A and B2 inside B, you have a vinyl holy grail. That is the UK first press. It was the best listening experience I've had this year listening to this record. Maybe even the best listening experience I had in this year, full stop. We had the house here to ourselves. We sat down and listened to side A all the way through, a little bit of side B, and it was magnificent. There is a caveat, and the caveat is that that record in that condition costs a lot of money. I mean, well north of 1,000 Australian dollars. And that's before, more than likely, you pay import GST and, insurance and postage and everything else. So when you add, let's call it a value for money equation in, then the UK first press becomes a challenge, because to get a nice copy that isn't, destroyed in some way is really difficult and usually really expensive. So the 5 physical copies that I have here that I'm going to show you, the 5 that I kept through this year of exploration, are a mix of high quality vinyl, high quality pressing, with some historical context, and availability / value for money. These are copies that you can own, maybe with one special proviso, but we'll come to that. So the UK first press A2B2 is the best sounding copy. There is, in my mind, no question, but it's kind of unattainable. Certainly to me. I wouldn't pay that type of money, and I love that record. But I know some of you would. So for those of you who are thinking about it, I can tell you it is magnificent. All right, so let's move on to my top 5. I've been debating this for a really long time. I've been prevaricating, but I am where I am now. So let's get into it. All right. In 5th place is this copy. And by the way, I'm not going to go into all the accoutrement. I'm not going to go into posters and stickers, etc. But just one little exception, which we'll come to. This is the 30th anniversary pressing, released 2003. You can go online and you can get all of the history of the way that this record came together. It's a mixture of kind of digital and analog. It has some of the greatest fingerprints in kind of vinyl pressing all over it. Doug Sachs and Kevin Gray and others, and it has its very vibrant fan club online. Interestingly, though, it was pressed at Rainbow, which is a slightly lower quality pressing plant compared to RTI or QRP or some of the others out there that are really high quality. And you know what? You can tell. And I think that's the reason why I initially had this record in my 3rd place and I moved it to my 5th after some more listening over these holidays. The vinyl is a little bit noisy. So if you have quality of vinyl as one of your criteria, which I do, this record is a little bit challenged. It is really hard to get a version that doesn't have surface noise, no matter how hard you clean it. The other thing is the way that this is pressed, the way that this is mastered, is that the higher frequencies are accentuated and the lower frequencies are accentuated as well. Now, my system, which I described earlier in the video, is tuned a little bit toward kind of rock and funk music. So I have a little bit of a bassier system, and therefore this particular pressing really does sound bassy. But thankfully, not overpoweringly so, but it is still very, very clearly there. And that means that incredible middle listening experience of Dark Side of the Moon, which in many ways is the whole, the kind of the vocals, the harmonies, the percussion that's been played, the incredible keyboard swells, and obviously David Gilmour's guitar in some way that's just a little bit further back in the mix, at least to my ears. And so whilst it's still a wonderful listen, if you have a copy, it's excellent. It just didn't crack the top tier. If the vinyl was a little bit better, I think it may well have got there. It was cut with the standard blue triangle as opposed to the solid triangle, which is the UK A2B2. This is completely colored in. So this doesn't quite follow that pattern in terms of the labeling, but it's still a fantastic record. If you've managed to get a copy and it's super clean, and you've done well, and that is a killer record. Now, in fourth place is maybe one of the more controversial releases of this album. And it took me 3 attempts to find a good quality copy. There are quite a few out there, some of them very expensive, but be careful. This is the Mobile Fidelity original master recording of Dark Side of the Moon. Now, there were 2 releases, one in 1979 and one in 1981. Really, the only way to tell the difference is on the sleeve. You can see here that this is, the original master recording is slightly italicized. In the first press of the MOFI of 1979, that italicization doesn't exist. It's kind of straight. Other than that, I could hear no difference. It's the Mobile Fidelity record is also notable in that it has kind of that unique Mobile Fidelity press vinyl or label pressing design. So you can see it's a white label. It notifies original master recording across the top, and has the track lists within the triangle, which I think is actually quite cute. A lot lighter feeling vinyl compared to most of the rest of these, which kind of, again, a typical MOFI trait of the time. These really high quality Japanese vinyl, so it's the vinyl quality isn't the issue here. I think the reason this isn't in kind of top 2 is because, again, of the mastering. This is demonstrably heavy bottom end. This pressing is thuggish. The drums pound. It is a visceral experience. And again, I think the beauty of this record, and the reason that it's often the number 1 pick that people want when they either restarting their vinyl collection or they've had one for a while, is that the instrumentation, the balance is so suited and warm and vibrant that it just sounds great in vinyl. There's no such thing as a bad Dark Side of the Moon pressing, other than one Taiwanese bootleg that I picked up, which was horrendous. But anyway, the official presses, all of them are great. But this is a very singular EQ. It really clearly bangs the bass, and in some songs that sounds absolutely unbelievable. Breathe, The Great Gig in the Sky. In others, it is kind of distracting, but not in a completely unpleasurable way. It is still a fantastic listen. And if you've managed to pick up a copy, again, it's wonderful. It beat out the 30th anniversary just because of the quality of the vinyl, which is, really excellent. And it's a really fun listen. For those of you who are enthusiasts, I think it's an interesting contrast to maybe some other copies that you have. And I found my MOFI copies this year at pretty reasonable money, $100 or less. And so keep an eye out. They're out there. All right. Now we're moving into rarefied air. These are the 3. And to be honest, there's quite a big gap between these 3 and the rest. One I got right at the beginning of the year, and it's this one. This looks very unassuming. It really is. And when I tell you what it is, hopefully you can see where it says Made in Great Britain. This is the UK 3rd press. It was still pressed in 1973 when the record was released. It was just because it sold by the bucket load. Now let's think about why that was. The band was no more than 4 years old. Think about that. The band was 4 years old when they released Dark Side of the Moon. They'd already released 5 or 6 albums, Each album was an increment on the way to Dark Side of the Moon. But part of the reason why Dark Side of the Moon is so stratospherically amazing and unique and singular is it is the culmination, or let's say the I'm not sure what the right word, it might come to me in a second. It is the meeting of four immense talents trying to deal with the fact that their friend and muse and leader was no longer amongst them. You know, everything else, nearly everything else, Syd Barrett was all over, no longer part of the band. And this group of four geniuses are trying to come to terms with that fact. And all over this record are references to Syd Barrett, as in Wish You Were Here or Shine On You Queen's Down. But that's very in your face in some ways. In this record, it's the madcap laughter. It's the I think the Great Gig in the Sky doesn't exist without Syd Barrett. I mean, there's just so many things. So this UK third press, if you closed your eyes and kind of were in the room, it could be the first press, but it just doesn't quite have the power. The probably the stampers were just coming off a little bit, but it is 1/20th of the cost. My copy cost me $60, and it sounds great. It really does. The balance of the bass and that phenomenal kind of middle sound, the instrumentation, the sound stage is just wonderful. It is a massively pleasurable experience. Now, the reason that this is a third release is in the Dead Wax, which I mentioned earlier. Instead of A2B2, it's A3B3. And there's a couple of other little signifiers. So, for example, you can see here it says Made in Great Britain, but it also says Made in Great Britain in the kind of circular text around the label. And those are kind of the singular, those, I'll try and make it a little bit clearer. There's Made in Great Britain, but it also says it right there. And so these are the little subtleties that differentiate. But if you closed your eyes and you didn't have that first press and you were listening to this, you genuinely wouldn't really know, and you'd have maybe an extra $1,500 in your pocket. It's really good. Really, really, really good. If you can find it, and you can buy them pretty reasonably on Discogs, you get a clean copy. It's beautiful. All right. I think this next pick is the most controversial. It was the last of the presses that I sought, the hardest to find. I actually won it at an auction in a UK auction site called Omega Auctions. And in the lot, I won a UK quadrophonic press of Dark Side of the Moon and a UK quadrophonic press of Wish You Were Here. Now that is utterly stupendous, really. And this quadrophonic UK press of Dark Side of the Moon, you can see the little signifier SQ, the quadrophonic symbol, was the biggest surprise. A couple of things I'm just going to show you on this record. The paper label, made in England, always a good thing to look out for. Very, very similar to the UK third in that you've got that triangle. But here you've got quadrophonic and the matrix number Q4 SHVL 804. Made in Great Britain, of course, EMI Harvest. This was, I think, I'm conscious of having recency bias here because it is the most recent one that I managed to find. But it's so good, I had to stick it in at number 2. It has a different mix. The voices, the top and tail of the record, the transitions in some of the tracks, even some slight differences in the guitar solos are noticeable. If there is a UK quadrophonic Dark Side of the Moon expert out there, I would love to talk to you. It is like you're listening to Dark Side of the Moon, except it's just ever so slightly askew, but in a really positive way, in a totally pleasurable way. I haven't listened to this yet with other people. I've done only privately. I'm very curious as to what others might think of it. It is a little bit noisy. My copy is not perfect, but it is a complete curveball. I know that quadrophonic records are designed for this 4-speaker kind of system, and it's got, and there are those enthusiasts out there. But like the Australian quadrophonic, there's a spaciness and otherworldliness to this quadrophonic mix played on a good stereo system that is really appealing to the ears. It's so warm and inviting, and it's, you know, Pink Floyd did make some complex music, but part of the reason I think Pink Floyd are so monolithically amazingly successful is that a lot of the music is simple. It is not complex, but what it is imbued with emotion and clarity of thinking and quality, and the quadrophonic mix really accentuates that. Nothing stands out. Everything's where it's supposed to be. And because it's just that little bit different, it's super appealing, at least to me. I fully thought that this particular version would be anomaly, kind of a quirk, a little bit, maybe not like the Taiwanese bootleg, but kind of interesting, but wasn't something that was going to lodge in my mind and kind of eat away at my love of this record, but it did. And, you know, there's the pleasure in a little project like this. Right, we have landed at the number 1 pick. The interesting thing about this is that I went into the year with a number 1 in mind, one that I've had for a long time, and I was trying to find records that would dislodge it. Now, the A2B2 does dislodge in terms of pure sound quality this particular pressing, but if we look at vinyl quality, soundstage, quality of pressing, even to a certain extent, some of the packaging that comes with it, and the experience of listening to the record, this was my number 1. And it was, and is, the Japanese third press. Third press, right? That sounds wrong, doesn't it? It sounds like, what the hell are you talking about? It even doesn't have the blue triangle. It's got the EMI label. It's kind of got this brown and red thing. It's really not very attractive, and there's nothing much of interest there in terms of the label. It doesn't really, you wouldn't, that doesn't look like Dark Side of the Moon, does it? Of course, the obi that they designed for, and I say they, whoever in the design companies that worked for EMI in Japan, whoever designed the obi for this, I think deserves an incredible amount of recognition, because obviously this is an iconic design, and you can tell from my t-shirt, you know, this is the musician that I fell in love with this year, Miles Davis. And, you know, I think Miles Davis would have loved Dark Side of the Moon. And so this gatefold is beautiful. I'm not going to talk about the posters and all that stuff, but the magazine that came with the Japanese presses of Dark Side of the Moon is just beautiful. I love the fact that it's got the lyrics and it's got just these fantastic photographs of the band from the time that I just really, really like. And I think they add to the overall experience. But setting all that aside, you put this record on. I played it, track 1 last night for some friends. We had a vinyl night around here last night. And the build-up, that incredible release of tension in the opening track is, and that how the crescendo kind of cascades into the instrumentation. It's like your hold the breath moment on whether this is like a top quality pressing, a mid quality, or somewhere down there, because almost immediately you can get a sense of it. And this Japanese third pressing, the vinyl quality is exemplary. It is the best of all that I listened to, all 18, 19 versions. It is not even close. The vinyl quality is impeccable. And what that means for a record that's got such a high kind of dynamic range is that if you want to focus on the bass, you can. If you want to focus on Nick Mason's hi-hat, you can. If you want to focus on the guitar, you can. If you want to focus on the background vocals, you can. And you can hear them in space. And there's no distractions, and it is such a pleasurable experience. The balance of the instrumentation, I think, is perfect. The only difference between the UK first press and this Japanese third, in my mind, is that the UK first press is cut ever so slightly louder, which I think makes a difference. But look, I mean, what you're talking about here are nitpicking. This is one of my top 3 vinyl pressings in my entire collection. It has been since the minute I bought it. I think it's, you know, the interestingly, the Japanese first press does have the blue triangle and is, or does it? I think it does. It has, it's, maybe not, but it has that, let's call it, attraction of being the first press, but it just does not sound as good. And, you know, the Japanese practice of represses, getting new stampers really comes to the fore here, because I think by the third press they nailed it, and they knew, and the people buying knew, because you go to Japan, you can find copies of this record everywhere, because everyone bought it, because everyone knew it was amazing. And this comes back to my key point at the beginning: quality of the vinyl, quality of the listening experience, value for money. This record can be picked up for not much more than what you pay in JB Hi-Fi or in Tower Records or HMV or wherever you buy your records all around the world. You can get this Japanese copy for not much more, and you should. It is demonstrably, measurably, objectively, subjectively better. Now, you all out there can make your own minds up on what's the best. But for me, when I reach for this record, and I do it often, this is the one I go for. Therefore, it has to be my number 1. Well, there you have it. The top 5, ranked, dissected. Hopefully, you've enjoyed that. I am looking forward to the comments, to see and hear, what have I missed? What should I be looking for now? What's going to elbow its way into this top 5? I love this record. I think that everything that embodies curating and collecting and loving vinyl is wrapped up in Dark Side of the Moon. All right, this is it, over and out. Year-long project ticked. I'm going to have to come up with something new. Please leave a comment, like, whatever. Get involved in my little club. Send me an email, shortcutsrecordsaus@gmail.com, if you'd like to be on my mailing list. Thank you so much, as always. Looking forward to hearing your own thoughts. Did you enjoy this? Or was it a slog? And yeah, have a fantastic 2025, all of you. Love, as always. Thanks.